Hi. Have you ever wondered why we have 5 fingers on our hands and feet and not, say, 3, 4, or maybe even 6 fingers? The answer to this question can be found in the history of evolution. Monkeys, from which we evolved, had 5 fingers. And they, in turn, inherited 5-fingered limbs from their own ancestors. And so on, all the way back to ancient amphibians that lived more than 300 million years ago. Just think about it, 300 million years. That's such a long time. So what exactly happened back then, you might ask, since I'm putting so much emphasis on that date? The thing is, at that time, there were amphibians on Earth with different numbers of fingers. Paleontologists have unearthed the skeleton of Ichthyostega, which had 7 fingers, and Acanthostega, which had 8 fingers on its limbs. I believe the variety in the number of fingers among amphibians of that period didn't end there by any means. So where did this diversity come from? In the Devonian period, 385 million years ago, fish, or let's call them aquatic dwellers, began to colonize the land en masse. But why and for what reason? Well, first of all, a warm and humid climate had formed on land. Secondly, there was now a sufficient food supply with plenty of different plants and insects. Thirdly, because of these plants and insects, a large amount of organic matter was washed into the water, and as it oxidized, the oxygen content in the water decreased. This contributed to the development in fish of adaptations for breathing atmospheric air. And of course, time was passing. Many bodies of water were drying up, and fish had to crawl on their bellies, pushing themselves along the ground with their fins to reach neighboring bodies of water in order to save their lives. And this happened more than once. And as a result of all this, a certain type of fish, the lobe-finned fish, gradually turned into an amphibian, which had already developed limbs and could freely breathe atmospheric air. And it was at this point that the mass colonization of land by amphibians began, as they found a new home there. We have smoothly moved away from our question, just as we approached it. Limbs. They developed from the fins of fish. Fingers from the ray bones in those fins. And the number of these bones varied. Accordingly, the number of fingers also varied. This explains the numerical diversity of fingers in amphibians of that period. But it so happened that it was the 5-fingered form that gave rise to all the diversity of modern vertebrates. And animals with a different number of fingers went extinct. But they didn't die out because they had an unfortunate number of fingers, but for some other reasons. Most scientists tend to believe that it was pure chance. Perhaps the 5-fingered form just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It turns out that the 5-fingered limb became the primitive, original structure of the limb for all terrestrial vertebrates. Of course, not all animals found such a limb convenient, and in some, the number of fingers was reduced, and in some cases, even completely lost. For example, in the ancestors of horses, a hoof developed on the middle finger. This finger became greatly enlarged, and the other fingers only hindered its growth. Snakes used to have limbs. Didn't know that? There is evidence for this. Pythons have remnants of a pelvis and hind limbs which stick out a little from under the skin and look like 2 small claws. Now let's imagine that it wasn't the 5-fingered amphibians who got lucky, but the 6-fingered ones. Then all of us would have 6 fingers now. What would you call that 6th finger? The number system would be different. Right now we have a decimal system because we have 10 fingers, but it would have been a duodecimal system. And many scientists believe that such a system is much more efficient than our current one. The Sumerians used this kind of system, and they were one of the oldest and wisest civilizations. The whole world could have been just a little bit different. Of course, there are other theories that explain why we have 5 fingers, but they aren't as well founded as the one we've discussed. Some scientists refer to formulas that can be used to determine the optimal number of limbs. Some believe that we inherited such limbs from extraterrestrial beings, and so on in that vein. However, a number of neurologists believe that we actually have too many fingers. They explain this by pointing out that modern robotic hands are designed with 2, 3, or 4 fingers, and that number is quite sufficient for the necessary manipulations. But personally, I believe that having 5 fingers is a gift, perhaps given to us by chance, maybe by evolutionary optimization, or even by extraterrestrial civilizations. But that doesn't really matter. The main thing is that we should value and develop this gift. That's all for today. I hope you found it interesting. See you next time, friends!